The sun was setting over the hills of Malibu, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The air smelled faintly of salt from the nearby ocean, mixed with the earthy scent of dry grass. Clint Eastwood sat on the porch of his sprawling ranch house, sipping a cup of coffee. He had always loved this time of day, when the world seemed to slow down just enough for him to catch his breath. At 93 years old, he still carried himself with the quiet confidence that had made him a legend in Hollywood. His sharp blue eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the beauty of the land he had called home for decades. Clint's peace was interrupted by the shrill ring of his phone. It wasn't often that his personal line rang at this hour, so he picked it up quickly, expecting it might be one of his children or an old friend checking in. Instead, it was Greg Miller, his attorney. Greg's voice came through the speaker, tight and urgent. "Clint, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "What's going on?" Clint asked, leaning forward slightly. Something in Greg's tone told him this wasn't a casual conversation. Greg hesitated before answering. "Pam Bondi has filed charges against you." Clint blinked, trying to process what he'd just heard. Pam Bondi? The name sounded familiar. He knew she was a former Florida Attorney General, someone known for being tough and unyielding, but why would she have anything to do with him? "Charges for what?" he asked, his voice calm despite the confusion swirling inside him. "It's about your ranch," Greg explained. "She's accusing you of violating environmental regulations. Specifically, she claims your land management practices are harming local wildlife habitats." Clint frowned deeply. He prided himself on being a responsible steward of the land. Over the years, he had worked hard to ensure his ranch operated sustainably. He employed eco-friendly methods, consulted with experts, and even partnered with conservation groups to protect native species. How could anyone accuse him of doing harm? "I don't understand," Clint said slowly. "This doesn't make sense. What proof does she have?" "She's presenting evidence tomorrow in court," Greg replied. "I'm heading over to your place now so we can go over everything together. We'll figure this out, Clint, don't worry." Clint hung up the phone and stared out at the landscape again, but this time his mind wasn't at ease. Questions raced through his head. Why would Pam Bondi target him? Did she have some kind of agenda? And more importantly, how serious was this situation? He didn't want trouble, especially not at his age, but he also wasn't about to let anyone push him around. By the time Greg arrived, the news had already spread like wildfire. Reporters gathered outside Clint's property, their cameras flashing, as they tried to capture footage of the iconic actor-turned-director. Word traveled fast in today's digital age, and within hours, headlines blared across social media platforms and news websites. Everyone wanted to know, was Clint Eastwood really facing arrest? Inside the house, Clint and Greg sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and legal documents. Greg laid out the details of the case as best he could. According to Bondi, Clint's controlled burns, a common practice used to prevent wildfires and maintain healthy ecosystems, had disrupted migratory bird patterns. Additionally, she claimed that water diversion systems installed on the ranch had harmed endangered fish populations in nearby streams. These accusations formed the basis of her lawsuit. "This feels like a witch hunt," Clint muttered, shaking his head. "I've done everything by the book. I've got permits for those burns, and the water systems were approved years ago. This isn't about protecting wildlife, it's about something else." Greg nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Bondi's reputation speaks for itself. She's not afraid to use the law to get what she wants, but we'll fight back. We'll show them the truth." As the evening wore on, another visitor arrived unexpectedly. Rachel Dawson, a young investigative journalist from the Los Angeles Tribune, knocked on the door. She introduced herself politely, explaining that she wanted to write a fair and balanced story about the situation. Clint eyed her warily at first. He'd dealt with reporters before, and not all of them had been honest. But there was something sincere about Rachel's demeanor. After a brief discussion, he agreed to let her stay for a while and observe. Rachel spent the next few hours asking questions and listening intently. She noticed how passionate Clint was about his ranch, how much care he put into maintaining it. She also couldn't help but wonder why Pam Bondi, who lived hundreds of miles away in Florida, had suddenly taken such a keen interest in California land disputes. There had to be more to the story than what met the eye. Before leaving, Rachel promised Clint she would dig deeper. "I'll find out what's really going on here," she said firmly. "If there's a bigger picture, I'll uncover it." As the night drew to a close, Clint stood on the porch once more, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, determination, and even a little fear. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, but he resolved to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same resilience that had defined his life. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test not only his patience but also his faith in justice. The morning sun rose over Malibu, casting golden light across Clint Eastwood's ranch. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled through the tall trees. But inside the house, the mood was far from peaceful. Clint woke up early, his mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming court hearing. He dressed in a simple gray suit, choosing to look sharp but understated. Today wasn't about making a statement. It was about proving his innocence. Greg Miller arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying a stack of files and looking as serious as ever. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, though the question felt more like a formality. "As ready as I'll ever be," Clint replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. He had faced tough moments before, both in life and on screen, but this felt different. This wasn't a movie where he could rewrite the script or call cut. It was real, and the stakes were high. When they arrived at the courthouse, it was clear that the case had drawn massive attention. Reporters lined the steps outside, their cameras clicking furiously as Clint stepped out of the car. Some shouted questions, but he ignored them, keeping his focus straight ahead. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Spectators filled the seats, eager to see how the legendary actor would handle the accusations against him. Pam Bondi sat at the prosecution table, exuding confidence. She wore a tailored navy blue suit and carried herself with an air of authority. Known for her bold moves and no-nonsense attitude, she wasted no time laying out her case once the proceedings began. Standing before Judge Charles Bennett, she presented evidence that painted Clint's ranch activities in a negative light. "Your Honor," Bondi began, her voice firm and clear, "Mr. Eastwood's land management practices have caused significant harm to local ecosystems. Controlled burns, while permitted under certain conditions, have been conducted irresponsibly, disrupting migratory bird patterns and endangering species already struggling to survive. Furthermore, water diversion systems installed on his property have depleted streams essential to endangered fish populations." As Bondi spoke, images flashed on a screen behind her, photos of charred fields, dried-up streams, and distressed animals. To the untrained eye, it seemed damning. Clint listened intently, his expression unreadable. He knew these pictures didn't tell the whole story, but convincing others of that would be the challenge. Greg stood up to respond. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "while my client acknowledges the importance of environmental protection, the claims made here are exaggerated and misleading. Mr. Eastwood has always prioritized sustainable practices on his ranch. Every action taken has been within legal guidelines and approved by relevant authorities. We will provide documentation to support this." Judge Bennett nodded thoughtfully, taking notes as both sides presented their arguments. The tension in the room grew thicker with each passing minute. Clint glanced around, noticing how everyone hung on every word. He spotted Rachel Dawson sitting quietly in the back row, her notebook open and pen poised. Her presence gave him a small sense of comfort. He hoped she would see through the theatrics and uncover the truth. But then came the moment that shocked everyone. After summarizing her case, Pam Bondi made a surprising move. Turning to the judge, she said, "Given the severity of the alleged violations, Your Honor, I request not only fines but also immediate arrest if Mr. Eastwood fails to comply with preliminary restrictions until this matter is resolved." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Bennett looked startled. Arrest? For Clint Eastwood? The idea seemed almost surreal. Bailiffs shifted uncomfortably near the door, unsure whether they'd actually need to act on Bondi's demand. Clint remained calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. He had expected Bondi to play hardball, but this went beyond what anyone anticipated. Greg immediately objected, arguing that such a drastic measure was unnecessary and punitive. The judge, clearly uneasy, took a long pause before speaking. "I'll consider the motion," Judge Bennett finally said, his tone measured. "But for now, Mr. Eastwood is free to leave pending further review." As the session adjourned, reporters swarmed outside, desperate for comments. Clint walked past them silently, his face a mask of stoic determination. Inside the car, Greg turned to him. "She's playing dirty," he muttered. "This isn't just about wildlife anymore. It's personal." Clint nodded grimly. "I figured as much. But we won't let her win." Meanwhile, Rachel Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Back at her office, she pored over the documents Greg had shared during a brief interview earlier. Permits, expert reports, and correspondence between Clint's team and environmental agencies all pointed to one conclusion: his ranch operations were lawful and responsible. Yet Bondi's accusations painted a completely different picture. Determined to dig deeper, Rachel decided to visit the ranch herself. She called Sarah Logan, Clint's longtime ranch manager, and arranged a tour. When she arrived the next day, Sarah greeted her warmly and offered to show her around. As they walked through the property, Sarah explained the various measures they had implemented to protect the environment. "We've installed solar panels to reduce our carbon footprint," Sarah said, pointing to rows of panels glinting in the sunlight. "And we work closely with conservation groups to monitor wildlife populations. Those controlled burns Bondi mentioned, they're crucial for preventing wildfires and maintaining healthy grasslands." Rachel nodded, jotting down notes. "Everything," Sarah described, aligned with what she'd read in the documents. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that there was more to Bondi's actions than met the eye. Her breakthrough came later that afternoon when she stumbled upon an old filing cabinet tucked away in a storage shed. Inside, she found stacks of letters exchanged between Pam Bondi and Victor Lang, a wealthy real estate developer. The content of the correspondence sent chills down her spine. Lang expressed interest in acquiring Clint's ranch to build a luxury resort, and Bondi appeared to promise assistance in facilitating the deal. One line stood out: "If we can leverage legal pressure, Eastwood might be persuaded to sell." Rachel's heart raced as she realized the implications. This wasn't about protecting nature, it was about greed. Bondi was using her influence to push Clint into giving up his land. Clutching the documents, Rachel rushed back to Los Angeles, determined to expose the truth. That night, as Clint sat alone on his porch, he reflected on the day's events. The courtroom drama, the media frenzy, the lingering uncertainty, it all weighed heavily on him. But deep down, he refused to give in. He had spent years building his ranch into a place of beauty and balance, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him. Unbeknownst to him, help was on the way. Rachel Dawson was already drafting her exposé, ready to shine a light on the real motives behind Pam Bondi's attack. And as dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of a new day, Clint allowed himself a small spark of hope. Whatever happened, next he vowed to stand his ground, with integrity, courage, and the unwavering belief that justice would prevail. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of Rachel Dawson's small apartment, casting soft light onto her cluttered desk. Papers and notes were spread out everywhere, covering every inch of available space. In the center of the chaos sat the documents she had uncovered at Clint Eastwood's ranch, letters exchanged between Pam Bondi and Victor Lang. Rachel reread them carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. This wasn't just a story about environmental regulations or land management. It was something bigger, darker, and far more personal. Rachel knew she had to act quickly. If she could publish her findings before the next court hearing, it might shift public opinion in Clint's favor. But she also understood the risks involved. Pam Bondi was a powerful figure, known for her sharp legal tactics and connections. Exposing her could invite backlash, not just for Rachel but for anyone associated with the investigation. Still, Rachel felt a deep sense of responsibility. She couldn't stand by and let an injustice go unchallenged. By mid-morning, Rachel had drafted the first version of her article, titled "Clint Eastwood Under Fire. Is This Really About Wildlife?" It outlined the accusations against Clint, highlighted the evidence supporting his claims of responsible land management, and revealed the correspondence between Bondi and Lang. Her tone was careful and factual, avoiding sensationalism while still pointing out the suspicious nature of Bondi's actions. Before sending it to her editor, Rachel decided to double-check one last detail. She called Sarah Logan, Clint's ranch manager, to confirm some specifics about the ranch's eco-friendly practices. Sarah answered immediately, sounding both surprised and grateful to hear from Rachel again. "I'm glad you're looking into this," Sarah said earnestly. "Clint's worked so hard to make sure everything we do here is sustainable. These charges are unfair." Rachel thanked her and hung up, feeling even more confident in her work. With all the pieces in place, she sent the article to her editor at the Los Angeles Tribune. Within hours, it was approved for publication. By evening, the exposé was live online, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Readers flooded the comments section, expressing outrage over Pam Bondi's alleged collusion with Victor Lang. Many praised Rachel for her investigative work, calling her a hero for standing up to corruption. Others demanded answers, urging authorities to investigate Bondi's actions further. The tide of public opinion began to turn, shifting away from Bondi and toward Clint Eastwood. At his ranch, Clint watched the news unfold with a mix of relief and disbelief. Greg Miller had brought him a printed copy of Rachel's article that afternoon, explaining its potential impact on the case. As Clint read through it, he felt a surge of gratitude, not just for Rachel's efforts but for the support of strangers who now believed in his innocence. "This changes things," Greg said, pacing back and forth in Clint's living room. "Bondi's credibility is taking a hit. If we play our cards right, we can use this momentum in court." Clint nodded thoughtfully. He trusted Greg's judgment, but he also knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Bondi was a formidable opponent, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, for the first time since the ordeal began, Clint allowed himself to feel a flicker of optimism. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi faced mounting pressure. Calls poured into her office from reporters and concerned citizens alike, demanding explanations. At first, she tried to brush off the allegations, dismissing Rachel's article as baseless speculation. But as more people dug into the details, cracks began to show in her defense. Victor Lang, realizing the scrutiny he was under, issued a statement distancing himself from the entire situation. "I have no interest in Mr. Eastwood's property," he claimed, though few believed him. Back in Los Angeles, Rachel received messages of thanks from people across the country. Some praised her courage. Others shared their own stories of fighting against powerful adversaries. One message stood out, a brief note from Clint himself. "Thank you for shining a light where there was only darkness," it read. "Your work means more than you know." Rachel smiled as she read the words, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. Journalism wasn't always rewarding. It often involved long hours, low pay, and constant criticism. But moments like this reminded her why she had chosen the profession in the first place. As the days passed, the fallout from Rachel's article continued to grow. Environmental groups that had initially supported Bondi's lawsuit began retracting their endorsements, citing concerns about her motives. Even Judge Charles Bennett seemed affected, asking for additional evidence from both sides before making any final decisions. In preparation for the next court hearing, Greg worked tirelessly to strengthen Clint's case. Armed with Rachel's findings, he filed a motion to dismiss the charges, arguing that Bondi's actions constituted abuse of power. He also requested sanctions against her for attempting to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. The day of the hearing arrived, and once again, the courthouse was packed with spectators. Cameras flashed outside as Clint walked in, flanked by Greg and Sarah Logan. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but different this time. People whispered among themselves, speculating about how the judge would rule given the new developments. When the session began, Judge Bennett wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Ms. Bondi," he said sternly, "given the recent revelations regarding your communications with Mr. Lang, I must question the legitimacy of your involvement in this case. Can you explain why these discussions took place?" Bondi stood up, visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor," she began, her voice less confident than usual, "my conversations with Mr. Lang occurred in my capacity as a private consultant after leaving public office. They have no bearing on the merits of this case." The judge raised an eyebrow, and yet Mr. Lang's statements suggest otherwise. Furthermore, Ms. Dawson's article raises serious questions about your motivations. Do you deny using legal pressure to influence Mr. Eastwood's decision regarding his property? Bondi hesitated, clearly caught off guard. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. After a long pause, she replied, "I acted within the bounds of the law, Your Honor. Any suggestions to the contrary are unfounded." Greg seized the opportunity. "Your Honor," he interjected, "the evidence speaks for itself. Ms. Bondi's actions were not motivated by concern for wildlife, but rather by a desire to benefit Mr. Lang's business interests. This is not justice. It is manipulation." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Bennett considered the arguments. Finally, he spoke. "While I cannot make a definitive ruling today, I will take these allegations seriously. Ms. Bondi, I expect full transparency moving forward. Failure to provide satisfactory explanations may result in consequences." As the hearing adjourned, Clint stepped outside, greeted by cheers from supporters. Reporters shouted questions, but he simply smiled and waved, choosing not to comment. Inside, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle wasn't over, but the scales were finally starting to tip in his favor. That evening, back at the ranch, Clint sat on his porch once more, watching the stars appear in the night sky. He thought about everything that had happened. The accusations, the courtroom drama, the unexpected ally in Rachel Dawson. Life had thrown him a curveball, but he had faced it head-on, refusing to back down. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He would continue to fight for what was right. And as long as he had integrity on his side, he believed he could overcome anything, even the most unlikely adversaries. The days following the explosive revelations in Rachel Dawson's article were a whirlwind of activity. Public opinion had shifted dramatically, and the pressure on Pam Bondi was mounting. For Clint Eastwood, it felt like the first real sign of hope since the ordeal began. But despite the growing support, he knew there was still work to be done. The legal battle wasn't over yet, and Bondi wasn't about to admit defeat. Greg Miller worked tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering every piece of evidence that could strengthen Clint's defense. He reviewed permits, expert reports, and correspondence with environmental agencies, ensuring they had a solid case to present in court. Meanwhile, Sarah Logan spent hours organizing records from the ranch, documenting years of sustainable practices. Together, they built a narrative that painted Clint as a responsible landowner who cared deeply about preserving nature, not destroying it. Rachel Dawson, too, remained deeply involved. Her article had sparked outrage across the country, but she wasn't content to stop there. She reached out to environmental experts, asking them to weigh in on the accusations against Clint. One biologist, Dr. Emily Carter, agreed to testify on his behalf. After visiting the ranch and reviewing its operations, she concluded that Clint's practices were not only lawful, but also beneficial to the ecosystem. Controlled burns are a standard tool for maintaining healthy grasslands, Dr. Carter explained during a phone call with Greg. And the water diversion system has been carefully designed to minimize impact on local streams. Armed with this new testimony, Greg felt more confident than ever. He prepared to file additional motions, arguing that the charges against Clint were baseless and politically motivated. But he also knew Bondi wouldn't go down without a fight. She had built her career on being tough and relentless, and this case was no exception. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Victor Lang had distanced himself completely, issuing a public apology and claiming he had no knowledge of Bondi's intentions. Environmental groups withdrew their support, citing concerns about her integrity. Even some of her former colleagues questioned whether she had crossed an ethical line. Despite this, Bondi refused to back down. She doubled down on her claims, insisting that her actions were justified and that Clint's ranch posed a genuine threat to wildlife. The tension reached a boiling point at the next court hearing. Once again, the courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers. Cameras flashed outside as Clint arrived, looking calm but determined. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Everyone wanted to know how Judge Charles Bennett would rule now that new evidence had come to light. When the session began, Bondi took the stand to defend her position. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge directly, "while recent allegations have sought to undermine my credibility, the facts remain unchanged. Mr. Eastwood's land management practices violate environmental regulations, and action must be taken to protect our natural resources." Greg immediately stood up to challenge her. "Your Honor," he countered, "Ms. Bondi's claims are based on selective interpretation of data. In reality, Mr. Eastwood's ranch operates within all legal guidelines and employs eco-friendly methods endorsed by experts. Furthermore, her collaboration with Victor Lang suggests ulterior motives unrelated to wildlife protection." To drive his point home, Greg called Dr. Emily Carter to the stand. The biologist testified about her findings, explaining how Clint's controlled burns and water systems actually supported biodiversity rather than harming it. She spoke clearly and confidently, leaving little room for doubt. The judge listened intently, nodding occasionally as she presented her case. Bondi tried to discredit Dr. Carter's testimony, questioning her methodology and expertise, but the biologist remained composed, answering each challenge with professionalism and clarity. By the time she stepped down, it was clear that her input had strengthened Clint's position significantly. As the hearing progressed, Judge Bennett grew visibly frustrated with Bondi's evasiveness. When asked directly about her communications with Victor Lang, she struggled to provide satisfactory answers. "These discussions occurred in my capacity as a private consultant," she repeated, though her explanation sounded hollow even to her own ears. Finally, the judge interrupted her. "Ms. Bondi," he said firmly, "your involvement in this case raises serious concerns about conflicts of interest. It appears your actions may have been influenced by factors beyond environmental protection. I will need further clarification before proceeding." Bondi sat down, visibly shaken. For the first time, cracks began to show in her usually unshakable demeanor. Outside the courtroom, reporters buzzed with speculation. Many believed the tide had turned decisively in Clint's favor. Back at the ranch, Clint reflected on the day's events. He felt a sense of cautious optimism, but reminded himself not to celebrate prematurely. "We've got momentum," he told Greg and Sarah over dinner. "But we can't let our guard down. Bondi's not going to give up easily." Rachel Dawson continued to play a crucial role in shaping public perception. She wrote follow-up articles highlighting the flaws in Bondi's arguments and emphasizing the importance of holding powerful figures accountable. Her work earned widespread acclaim, cementing her reputation as a fearless journalist committed to uncovering the truth. As the days passed, the pressure on Bondi intensified. Legal experts weighed in, criticizing her handling of the case and questioning her ethics. Some even suggested she might face consequences beyond the courtroom if evidence of misconduct came to light. Faced with mounting scrutiny, Bondi made a surprising decision. She announced she would step away from the lawsuit, citing personal reasons. Her withdrawal sent shockwaves through the legal community. While she didn't admit wrongdoing, her sudden retreat was widely seen as an acknowledgement of defeat. Without her leading the charge, the case against Clint began to unravel. Prosecutors struggled to justify continuing the lawsuit, especially given the overwhelming evidence supporting his innocence. For Clint, the news brought a mix of relief and vindication. He had always believed in his principles, but seeing others rally to his side reinforced his faith in justice. "This wasn't just about me," he told Greg one evening. "It was about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." As preparations for the final hearing got underway, Greg submitted a motion to dismiss the remaining charges. With Bondi gone and public sentiment firmly on their side, he felt confident they could secure a favorable outcome. Judge Bennett, too, seemed eager to resolve the matter, acknowledging the lack of credible evidence against Clint. On the morning of the final hearing, Clint arrived at the courthouse feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Reporters greeted him warmly, many congratulating him on weathering the storm. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than usual, as if everyone sensed the end was near. When Judge Bennett delivered his verdict, his words were clear and decisive. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he said, "I find insufficient grounds to uphold the charges against Mr. Eastwood. His land management practices comply with all applicable regulations, and allegations of environmental harm have not been substantiated. The case is hereby dismissed." A wave of applause swept through the courtroom. Clint stood up, shaking hands with Greg and Sarah, gratitude shining in his eyes. Outside, supporters cheered as he emerged, surrounded by reporters eager for his reaction. Instead of giving a lengthy statement, Clint simply smiled and said, "Sometimes life throws you challenges, but if you stay true to yourself and do what's right, you'll make it through." Later that evening, back at the ranch, Clint sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The past few months had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but they had also reminded him of the power of resilience and integrity. As he gazed out at the land he loved so dearly, he felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face them, with courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in doing what was right. The final chapter of Clint Eastwood's legal battle began not with a bang, but with a quiet sense of relief. The dismissal of the charges felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders, leaving him free to return to the life he had always cherished. Yet even as the dust settled, the ripple effects of the case continued to spread far beyond the courtroom. In the days following Judge Charles Bennett's ruling, public attention remained fixed on the story. Media outlets dissected every detail, praising Rachel Dawson for her investigative work and criticizing Pam Bondi for her questionable tactics. Bondi herself retreated from the spotlight, issuing a brief statement claiming she had acted in good faith. Few believed her, and calls for accountability grew louder. Legal experts debated whether formal consequences might follow, though nothing concrete emerged, at least not right away. For Clint, the aftermath was a mix of gratitude and reflection. He spent hours sitting on his porch watching the sun rise and set over the hills of Malibu. The ranch had been his sanctuary for decades, a place where he could escape the chaos of Hollywood and reconnect with nature. Now, more than ever, he appreciated its beauty and tranquility. Every blade of grass, every bird in the sky seemed like a reminder of what he had fought so hard to protect. Greg Miller visited often during those first few weeks, helping tie up loose ends and ensuring no lingering threats remained. "You're in the clear now," Greg assured him one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "But if anything comes up, anything at all, you let me know." Clint nodded, grateful for Greg's dedication. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said sincerely. "Or without Rachel. She really stepped up when it mattered most." Rachel Dawson became something of a hero in the eyes of the public. Her articles had exposed the truth, turning the tide in Clint's favor and shining a light on the dangers of unchecked power. Readers praised her courage, and colleagues hailed her as a rising star in journalism. For Rachel, the recognition was humbling. She hadn't set out to become famous. She simply wanted to tell the truth. But seeing the impact of her work filled her with pride. One evening, Clint invited Rachel to the ranch for dinner. It was a simple meal prepared by Sarah Logan, featuring fresh vegetables grown on the property and grilled steak cooked to perfection. As they ate, Clint raised a glass in gratitude. To Rachel, he said warmly, without your determination, none of this would have been possible. Rachel blushed, feeling both honored and slightly overwhelmed. It wasn't just me, she replied modestly. You stood your ground and people rallied behind you because they saw how much this place means to you. After dinner, Clint gave Rachel a tour of the ranch under the soft glow of twilight. They walked through fields dotted with wildflowers, past streams alive with fish, and into wooded areas teeming with wildlife. This is my legacy, Clint explained quietly. Not the movies or the awards, but this land. Knowing I've done my part to take care of it makes everything else worthwhile. Rachel listened intently, understanding exactly what he meant. In many ways, Clint's story mirrored her own journey as a journalist. Both had faced challenges head-on, refusing to back down despite overwhelming odds. And both had emerged stronger for it. As time passed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. Reporters stopped showing up unannounced at the ranch gate, and the constant buzz of media attention faded away. Clint resumed his daily routines, spending mornings tending to the land and afternoons reading or working on personal projects. Occasionally, fans would stop by to say hello, inspired by how he had handled the situation. To each of them, Clint offered the same advice. Stay true to yourself. Integrity matters more than anything else. Sarah Logan, too, found renewed purpose in her role as ranch manager. The experience had shown her just how important their conservation efforts were. Not only for the environment, but also for setting an example others could follow. She worked tirelessly to document the ranch's sustainable practices, hoping to inspire similar initiatives elsewhere. Meanwhile, Rachel continued to write stories that made a difference. Her expose on Clint's case opened doors she never imagined, leading to opportunities to investigate other high-profile issues. Yet she never forgot the lessons she learned during those tense weeks. Courage, persistence, and a commitment to the truth were qualities she vowed to carry with her throughout her career. Months later, as autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and red, Clint hosted a small gathering at the ranch to thank everyone who had supported him. Greg, Sarah, Rachel, and Dr. Emily Carter were among the guests, along with a handful of close friends and family members. They shared laughter, stories, and memories under a canopy of stars, celebrating not just victory but resilience. As the night drew to a close, Clint stood up to speak. His voice was calm but heartfelt. This whole experience taught me something important, he began. Life isn't always fair. Sometimes people will try to take advantage of you or push you around. But if you stand firm, if you stay true to your values, you can overcome anything. I'm proud of what we accomplished here, but more importantly, I'm proud of the way we did it. With honesty, respect, and integrity. The crowd erupted into applause, moved by his words. Rachel smiled, thinking about how far they'd come since that first phone call from Greg. What started as a fight against injustice had turned into a testament to the power of unity and perseverance. In the weeks and months that followed, Clint returned to his quiet life, content to focus on the things that truly mattered. He planted new trees, expanded the solar panel system, and welcomed visitors eager to learn about sustainable living. The ranch thrived, a living embodiment of his principles, and while the world eventually moved on to other headlines and scandals, the story of Clint Eastwood's battle and the people who stood beside him remained etched in memory. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, doing the right thing can change everything. As another day ended and the sun dipped below the horizon, Clint stood once more on his porch gazing out at the land he loved. The air smelled of earth and pine, and the sound of crickets filled the night. He thought about the journey he'd been through, the challenges, the victories, and the lessons learned along the way. Life throws curveballs, he murmured to himself, echoing words he'd spoken before. But integrity always wins in the end. With that, Clint turned and walked back inside, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring, with grit, grace, and a touch of cowboy wisdom.